Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another video. Today we'll be building from scratch a Mars Rover Picture of the Day application, which will be similar to NASA's Astronomy Picture of the Day service. Essentially, we'll be creating a scheduled service that sends you an email every day with a list of pictures that the Curiosity Mars rover took on the same day. In another video, we'll cover how we can actually deploy this application. And of course, if you find any of this content interesting and you want to see more videos of cool projects or tutorials, please do consider hitting that like and subscribe button as it really helps out the channel an incredible amount. But for now, let's start by reviewing the API we'll be working with. So we head over to the api.nasa.gov page, we can see the list of all the open APIs that NASA has provided for us. And if we scroll down just a little bit, and if we actually fill out this form here and include our email and name and whatnot, we can actually get a free API key, which is awesome. I've already done that, so we'll skip past this part now, and we're going to scroll down a bit more. And here we have the list of all the APIs that NASA provides for us. And one of them is the Mars Rover Photos API. And this essentially provides us access to a list of images, or all the images that NASA Mars rovers have taken over the past, as well as currently. Namely, rovers specifically called the Curiosity rover, the Opportunity rover, and the Spirit rover. One thing to note here is that only the Curiosity, as well as the newly added Perseverance rover, are active right now. So that only those ones will be able to generate images or up-to-date images. For this video, we'll just be using the Curiosity rover images. And if we scroll on a bit more, we can actually see that each rover has a set of cameras. So for this tutorial, for this application, we're going to try to retrieve at least one image from each of the cameras so we get a full range of what the Mars rover is actually seeing on that day. So yeah, this is the set of cameras that the Curiosity rover will be seeing, just as an example. And scrolling down a bit, there's a few ways we can actually query this API or a few endpoints. And we're actually going to be using the method of querying by the Earth date. And these are the couple of parameters that are listed here. So we're going to be following that. And we're actually just, to keep things simple, we're actually just going to use page one. So the first, so all the images on the first page of the response. So I've actually just used the demo key just to give you an idea of what the endpoint might return. This is pretty much the format. And as you can see, it tells you what camera it's from, the Marshall Sol date, the image source, the Earth date, what rover it's from, and whatnot. And if we just take a look at the first image, see what it looks like. This is what it pretty much looks like, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, right now, I think the Curiosity rover only sends black and white images, but that's fine as well. But yeah, anyway, that pretty much wraps up the section about going over what the API actually does. But without further ado, let's start writing some code. So to start, we're going to head over to your favorite editor. In this case, I'll just be using Visual Studio Code. And we're going to start with our Node.js project by creating an index.js file. And before we write any code, we're actually going to go ahead and install all the necessary dependencies. So right now, we actually need a few dependencies for this project. Namely, we're going to use a yarn first of all. Namely, we need a dependency called .m, and this will allow us to access environment variables. We also need a dependency called node mailer. This will allow us to send emails with Node. And we also need one called Axios. This is just an alternative to an HTTP request library to allow us to actually make the API call to NASA's API. And lastly, we need the node cron library, which allows us to basically schedule jobs and allow us to run our code every day at a certain time. And we can specify that later. So we're going to go ahead and hit enter. We're just going to install it. Awesome. Okay, so it's installed. And we can actually close our terminal now. I'm just going to really quickly add a git ignore just as a good convention. We never want to commit our node modules because that's a really big folder. So yeah. All right. Afterwards, we can actually start requiring our dependency. So to start, we're just going to write require .env, and it follows a special syntax. We just need to get the config field or call the config function as well. And next, we're going to get node mailer, and we're going to also get Axios. And last but not least, we're going to get node cron. Awesome. Okay, and that's pretty much it for dependencies. Next, the way I like to store URLs that we want to call for APIs is to hold a constant variable that stores pretty much the base URL. And what I mean by that is I'm going to hold a variable called base URL, and this basically stores the base format of the URL, and then we can attach any other endpoints on afterwards. This is just a convention I like to follow, but feel free to write it however you wish. And afterwards, I actually have this object already created, so I'll just paste it here. But basically, I'm going to create an object called camera types, and what this is holding is basically in the key, it will hold the short acronym for each of the cameras, and then the value, it will hold the full name of the camera value. Camera name. And basically, this will allow us to iterate through in a second. And select all the images from each of these cameras that are available. And then we'll also format it in our email a little better to indicate which camera it's from. But it'll make a lot more sense when we actually write the rest of the code. So I'm just going to paste that there because it would have taken a long time to type. And next, we're going to actually create our helper function, which is going to be called get today date string. And basically, this will allow us to get the format of the date string, which we'll need to pass to the endpoint that NASA has provided for us. So I'm going to just set up the framework of the function, and we're going to go ahead and create just a simple date variable. And then we're going to start to format the string. So we're going to use string interpolation here, and I'm going to first get the UTC full year. Feel free to use whatever, perhaps maybe the local time zone, which is just be like get full year or whatnot. But I'm going to use UTC format. You'll see in a second more in the next video where we actually deploy this application why UTC might be more useful. And then, of course, we're going to need a dash here. And we also need date.getUTC month and another dash. And we also need date.getUTC date. And depending on the time zone, you might need to add a -1 to the UTC date. In the time zone I'm living in, I'm just going to leave the -1 in as well. And I actually realized I forgot a +1 here because get UTC month actually returns a zero-based index of the month, and we all know we don't have a 0th month, so we actually have the first month, which is January. So we're going to keep add a 1 to the value as well. And that's pretty much it for this function. And next, we can actually start to write the function that will actually make the API call to the Mars Rover Photos API. And we're just going to call this get Mars images maybe, and this will need to be an asynchronous function. So we're going to note that. And all right, and we're going to start by formatting the request URL string. So I'm going to call this request URL, and we're going to use string interpolation again. And this is where it becomes handy, where the URL doesn't become super long when we're building it. That's why I created the variable above here. We're going to reference it, base URL, and then we're going to also reference the rest of the endpoint, which would be /curiosity/photos, and we're going to start to pass some query parameters such as the Earth date, and we can actually use the function that we have created here. So we're just going to call it get today date string. All right, awesome, and now we'll format it for us. And last but not least, we also need the API key. So here is where we ideally, oops, I forgot an equal sign. Here's where we ideally want to store such keys, for example, an environment variable. And even then, environment variables are not the best alternative. There's many other secure alternatives to that. But for this video, we'll just be using an environment variable. Since this API key isn't very secret, it's pretty much free anyway. So environment variables will do. And to reference that, we'll just do process.m.nasa. I'll name it NASA API key. Awesome, and we'll attach a semicolon. And awesome, so that's pretty much our string for the request URL that has been built for us. And we'll store environment variables in a second later. So next, we want to, of course, make the call. And this call will actually return to us a list of photos. So we're just going to call this photos. And to make the call, we're going to write await axios.get, and we're going to paste in the request URL. And of course, this is just a simple get request, so we don't need any additional parameters or whatnot. And the way this response is formatted is that it's going to be under the data.photos field. So we're going to attach that as well. So once that's done, now we can actually try to format the response that NASA has given us to something that is maybe perhaps more usable or applicable in our application. And what I mean by that is that we're actually going to try to group each photo by its camera name. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable called grouped photos. And to do that, we're actually going to use the JavaScript reduce function. So we're going to do photos.reduce, and if you recall, the reduce function takes an accumulator. In our case, it will be an object, and when we iterate, it'll go through each image, which is also held as an object with different fields. So I'll call it name as such, and the initial value of the reduce function will obviously be an object as mentioned. And awesome. So in the body of this reduce helper, we're actually going to perform a few checks. So we're going to go check whether like a key has already been created for this object that references camera. If it already is created and it holds an array as a value, then we're just going to add this new image object's URL onto the existing array. And if it hasn't been created, we'll just create a new object with the URL as the initial value. So to do that, we're just going to write array is array, which just checks if it's an array. And we're going to reference the accumulator, and we're going to use the key, which is the image object's camera.name field. And awesome. So that's pretty much it. Basically checking if the array exists. If it does, we're going to reference this again, and we're going to push to it. So we're going to write dot push and image object, and the field is called image source for the image URL. And of course, in the else case, the array doesn't exist, so we will have to create it. So once again, image object dot camera, camera name here. We're just going to create a new array, image object dot image source. Awesome. So this pretty much wraps up most of the function. Last but not least, with any reduce function, we need to make sure to return the accumulator, and that's it. And last but not least, we also need to return the group photos array, and group photos object. And awesome, yeah. So just to summarize here, this get Mars images function will essentially return an object where each key is one of the camera types, namely, like for example, FHAZ, RHAZ, and whatnot. So each key will be one of those, and each value will be an array of images associated to the camera type. And now once that's done, we can create our last helper function, which is essentially one that will help us create the HTML string that represents the content that we will hold in our email, or that we will actually send in our email. So we're going to call this generate email, and it's just going to take the output of the get Mars images function. So this will be an object, but I'm just going to call this images URLs. But once again, just keep in mind it'll be an object, and yeah, that will be the one parameter that it will take, and we will just use string interpolation here once again to format our HTML string, and that's what we'll return. Feel free to format this however you like to perhaps make it more pretty or whatnot. I'm just going to keep it really simple, and I'm just going to keep it really basic as well. So we're just going to do an H1 header, and we're going to call it images from the Curiosity Mars Rover and we're also going to include the date as well, I guess, to keep things a bit more specific. Images from the Curiosity Mars Rover for today's date, and of course we need the closing tag as well. And the next step is we're going to use some JavaScript to allow us to actually generate an HTML element for every single image URL. So to do that, we're going to actually start by writing object.keys, and basically this allows us to get all the keys of the image URLs parameter. And if you recall, all the keys are also the keys that are here as well, coincidentally. So after we've done that, we're going to once again use the reduce function. And basically, in this case, we'll be reducing to a single string, which is our HTML string. So I'm just going to call that HTML string here. And each value will be the camera type. So I'll call that camera type, or just type. And awesome. And of course, the initial value would just be an empty string, because that's what we'll start off with. And all right, so now we can fill up the body of the reduce function. And basically what we want is we're going to add additional values to the string. And to keep things nicely indented, I'm going to use string interpolation here as well. Might be seeming a little nested, it might be a bit messy, but it works, so we'll go with it. Anyway, basically, I'm just going to go ahead here and create an H3 header to indicate which camera this image is from. And to do that, we're going to reference our camera types global object, and we're going to type in the type. And this essentially will allow us to get this value. For example, if I had FHAZ as the type value, we will output this in our email. So it'll make more sense. Yeah. Anyway, moving back here, of course, we also need. We'll just say that this is the camera's image, and we're gonna include a closing tag. And awesome. And last but not least, we also need to include the image, of course. So we're just going to use the image tag and use the source field, and we're going to reference the image or retrieve it here. And that will be under the type, and it will also be the first field in the array. You can feel free to perhaps maybe like generate all the images, but for just keeping the email a bit more short, I'm just going to take the first image that is included in each group, and perhaps yeah, I'm just going to use the first image just to keep things simple. And of course, we're going to use a self-closing tag and just put a semicolon here. And last but not least, with reduce functions, we need to return the HTML string, which I realized I made a little typo here. And awesome. That pretty much wraps up the generate email function. So this will create the HTML string that we can actually use in our email when we send it. And now I know you've all been waiting for this. We can finally write the function that actually sends the email. And of course, this is going to be triggered by cron job. So I'm going to call this function execute job maybe. And this will need to be an asynchronous function. So we'll indicate it as such and just setting it up. Awesome. All right. And so with the node mailer module that we have imported here, the way that it works is that we need to set up different transports that we're going to use. So we're just going to use the default transport that they provide here. And we're going to create that by using the node mailer create transport function. And we're going to pass in an object with a couple of parameters for our transport. The first parameter of which is the host, and this is the SMTP host, the mail transfer protocol host. And in this tutorial, I'm just going to be using Gmail just because Gmail is a little bit more easy to configure to allow us to programmatically access and log into its account. So I'm going to, the SMTP server is just smtp.gmail.com. And the port by default is always 587 for SMTP servers, I believe. And security, in terms of whether it's secure or not, let's just put false. It doesn't really matter. And we're going to cover, right after writing this function, we're going to cover how we can actually set up our Gmail account to do this. And I would recommend us to create a new Gmail account just for this purpose. It's also actually what I've done too, but we'll see that in a second. And last but not least, we also need the username and the password, which is the address as well as the password, so that we can log in. I really prefer to use environment variables here, so I'm going to reference it as such. So user will be process.m.email user maybe, and pass would be process.m.email pass, I guess. Oops, that's not good. Okay. Anyway, excuse that typo there. Email password. Awesome. Okay, and just put a comma there. And okay, so that's pretty much our setup for the node mailer transport. And now we can actually try to send it. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in a try catch just so we can have some error handling implemented as well. And in case there's an error, we're just going to, we'll just log the error. And all right, so here is where we're actually going to begin to call all our helpers that we've created. This long, grueling process of creating all these helpers, we can finally use them. So I'm going to call this image URLs because this is going to be the output of the get Mars images function. And this is an asynchronous function, so we must await on it. So get Mars images, it doesn't take any parameters, and we will call the generate email function to produce the email template. So I'm going to name it as that. And we're going to pass in the image URLs argument as the argument. Awesome. So once we've called those functions, we can now send the email. And I'm just going to create a result variable to store the result just so we can have a reference in our logs maybe to see whether the email is successfully sent or not. So I'm just going to call this send email res, short for result. And this will also need to be awaited upon. So we're going to use await here. And we're going to reference the transporter field. And we're going to call the send mail function. And of course, the send mail function also takes a few parameters. So we're going to create an object there, and we're going to pass them in. And as you probably can guess, one of the parameters that it takes is the from address, which is just the address of which we're sending from. And this will also be the address that we're logging in here. So it will hold the exact same value here. So I'm just going to copy that, process.m.email user, comma. And it will also need to take a list or perhaps just one destination address. So you can either use an array here and send it to multiple people. I'm just going to send it to one person, which is just myself, and I'm going to keep it a little bit secure, or I guess you can call it secure, by using a environment variable, just so my emails are not included in the code anywhere. It's just a bit more clean in my opinion, but feel free to change it as you wish. So I'm going to call this recipient address, I guess. I hope I spelled it correctly. Yep. All right. And of course, just to keep it a little nice, I will include a subject as well. And we'll call this Mars Pictures of the Day from the Curiosity rover. Feel free to name it as whatever you want again. And last but not least, we need to include the HTML field. And basically this will allow us to specify any HTML content that we want to include as in the email. And of course, we have already created that in our email template variable. So we'll just reference that. And that is pretty much it. So last but not least, we also want to log it just to see if everything worked correctly. And we'll just say, if it hasn't reached the catch block, then it must have sent successfully. So we'll actually get the ID of which this email has sent. And we can do that by referencing the send email outputs field called message ID. Every time it will return a unique ID, and if we see that has been generated, it means that the message has sent successfully. And finally, we can wrap up our program by scheduling the cron job by using the node cron library that we have imported at the beginning. And to do so, we can just write cron.schedule. And depending on the time zone of which you are located in, or which this program is actually running in, you'll need to configure your cron job accordingly. So be very careful about that. Because we're going to be deploying this to a server later on, so that it's scheduled on a real live server. It's likely it's going to be in UTC time, so we're going to specify this in UTC time as well. And I just prefer to have it around like 5 p.m. My time. I'm in Pacific time, so I'm going to schedule this at 8 hours ahead, I believe, which is UTC right now. So that'll be 0:23. This specifies the number of minutes at which it's going to be on, and this is the hour. So 2300 hours, and star is the rest of the format. Oops. Delete that quote. And we also need to create an asynchronous callback, and so we'll set that up. And inside we can just set up a simple try catch block, and of course log the error, I guess. This might be duplicated logs from here, but we'll just keep it here anyway. So just logging it again. Of course, we're going to try to call the function. So this is going to be await execute job, and it takes no arguments, and awesome. So yeah, this pretty much wraps up the scheduling part. As you can see, it's not very complicated. Just make sure your cron expression is correct depending on the time that you want it to send. In this case, once again, this is UTC time. This is going to be UTC time for me. This will send at 5 p.m. Pacific, and this is converted to the UTC time to account for that. And yeah, that wraps up the scheduling part. Now we're going to go ahead and actually head over to Gmail and set up the Gmail account. And I'm going to really quickly show you what we need to do in order to allow us to programmatically log in. So once again, I highly recommend using a separate Gmail account, like perhaps just creating one just for this purpose, just so that, for example, like if a security breach were to happen, like maybe the environment variable of your password got exposed, then it wouldn't really matter as much. And also, the reason, we'll see in a second why, but basically, once you log in, we're going to head over to Google account, and under the security tab, we need to toggle this setting called less secure app access. And if you click into it, you can just toggle it on, so make sure it's on. And this basically allows less secure apps such as like code or programs to log into your Gmail account and perform operations on its behalf. And again, back to the point of creating a new Gmail account, if you had a new Gmail account, aside from your primary, email account, it wouldn't really matter if, for example, it got hacked or there was a security breach. So I highly recommend doing that just for this purpose if you wish to try out this application for yourself. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up this really tiny section about configuring your Gmail account for this program. And one last thing that we need to do is actually create the environment variables. So to do that, we can just quickly scan through our code, just keep track of what environment variables we need to create. And we can actually create this all in a .env file. And this .env file has to include a dot preceding it, and it has to be in the root folder. So yeah, this will store all our environment variables. I'm just going to put it on the side here just so we can see easily what we need to create. So a quick way to do this is just to find process.env. And as you can see here, we need a variable called the NASA API key. And to do that, the format that we will do this in is we'll hold the variable name and then we'll put an equal sign. And then the string, we can put whatever string or numbers, I guess, to store the value of this key. So your key might be different. I'm just going to put insert key here, I guess, just as an example. And of course, we also need the next environment variable will be the email user. So we'll do something like that, example at example.com maybe. And the next one will be email pass. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 maybe. And last one I believe is recipient address. So again, if you perhaps maybe you just want to send it to yourself or something, or to your primary email address, maybe that'll work too. And just to make sure, yeah, that's pretty much it. So this is these are all the environment variables that you need. And it'll follow this format. Of course, insert your own values here that you have retrieved. And before we end, I just really wanted to show you guys what the end product looks like. So basically, this is an email that was that I programmatically sent to myself on February 21st of 2021, I guess. And of course, this is the header of the email, and each image is labeled by the camera of which it was taken from. So there's a front hazard avoidance camera, and this is the image, I guess, of Mars, of what it looked like that day. Pretty cool. This chemistry and camera complex image, probably some chemical thing that I'm not too sure what's going on here. For you chemists out there, you'll probably understand this more maybe. And the last image I think that we got for this day is from the navigation camera image. And yeah, I guess this is some Martian rock. Anyway, that pretty much wraps up this tutorial. And of course, if you learned something or found this video helpful, please do consider hitting the like and subscribe button down below, as it really helps support future projects. And if you have any other content or tutorials that you'd like to see, feel free to suggest them in the comments below. And as always, I hope you're all staying happy and well out there. But for now, I'll see you in the next video.